Hello ladies and gentlemen, Willie here. Today we're talking about a few of the issues which I think Blizzard need to pay particular attention to when rolling out the Burning Crusade Classic. Not in any particular order at all, but these are just a few of the larger ones which really do need some consideration. The first thing that comes to mind though, and probably one of the biggest ones, is spell batching and melee leeway. So back pre-launch of Classic, when Blizzard first made a post that they were going to look at implementing these systems back, it was met with rapturous applause. There were very few dissenting opinions that this wouldn't be something which would be required for the game to really capture that vanilla feeling that it had moved away from, and that it would be necessary to preserve some interactions like double polymorphs or double charges, for example. But the way that it's ended up being implemented has been quite different from how it was back in vanilla, with every single spell and interaction being equally treated and subject to the spell batching loop. When you buy items from shops, they're delayed. Sometimes you feel like you got your cast off, start recasting, and you get interrupted, landing a heal, and then your target dies. Using execute, your rage disappears, but it does no damage. Using feign death, and it just straight up fails, vanishing and getting instantly knocked out of it. There are so many negative examples that it is brought on, much more so than the positive side. And I think now of all times, having had well over a year of experiencing how spell batching looks in the iteration Blizzard has implemented it in Classic, I'm not surprised that many players are saying, well, actually, I think it could be better. And for the sake of TBC, where we have things like Arena, which are a much more competitive form of PvP, as well as all the new PvE content, the game would very much benefit as a whole from some kind of reduction or removal of both of these effects. As for spell batching, it wasn't entirely removed until Warlords of Draenor actually, as per my research, which was a lot later than I thought it was. However, nowadays with our modern connections, which not many people are running at 400 ms all day every day and are just better PCs in general, this is more of a relic which is hampering gameplay than adding things to it. I think it really does move the goalposts on the skill cap, especially in PvP, but then again, is it required to keep some certain interactions in the game? I mean, even to this day on retail, you can still def CC, you can still vanish death coil, for example. Those are just how those abilities work and interact with each other, and always have been. It's not just strictly because of batching that those interactions exist. Also think about the reliance on pillars in arena combat, and having you run around a pillar and a melee class still being able to hit you, seemingly while they're on the other side of it. This would go doubly so for Tauren warriors. I'm very much hopeful for TBC that we can basically get rid of melee leeway, and that spell batching is either considerably reduced to like 50 ms tops or just straight up removed, and each ability gets answered by the server side as soon as possible. Next up, world buffs and consumable stacking. Both of these will still be in TBC from launch if it is in any way progressive. Now, I don't really think it would be progressive, or it may be in some parts than not others, but this is one of those areas where it does really need to be looked at if it's something that could possibly happen. I mean, consumable stacking is just crazy from what you need compared to other versions of the game to vanilla. I imagine most people have at least a bank ult which is stacked to the brim with various different items, because you just need such a wide variety of items per raid, as well as world buffs, which were at this point in vanilla becoming more and more apparent and more frequently used to aid raid progression. This carried on over into TBC, where the early tiers, especially the likes of Magtheridon's Lair, Gruul's Lair, and so on, were considered successors in Naxxramas to the difficulty level, and as such, players who had started to realise the power of world buffs went back and got them from the old world and then took them over to Outland again. And if we release full on progressively, world buffs will still exist, all the way up to patch 2.1. It's at that point in time when Blizzard made world buffs no longer work on characters above level 63, and all consumables were changed, so they're now either Guardian or Battle Elixirs. For example, Spirit of Zanza was made into a Guardian Elixir, Mongoose was made into Battle Elixir, and Flasks count for both of them, which reduced the enormous list of consumables you needed for vanilla down to flask, food, potion, and you're basically good to go. Overall, this really streamlines raid preparation, takes a lot of the annoyance out of wiping when you lose so much invested time, and it should make for a more enjoyable experience overall, so I'm hoping this is in from launch. Speaking of another thing from launch, let's talk about the way that TBC was rolled out back when it was the current version of the game. So on launch, there was an enormous amount of PvE content available. You had all of the dungeons and heroic dungeons, except Magister's Terrace, which was introduced alongside the Sunwell. You had Karazhan, Gruul's Lair, Magtheridon's Lair, Serpent Shrine Cavern, Tempest Keep, and technically Mount Highjaw, with the big barrier to entry being the achievements between one piece of content and the next, but they were all available technically. It just took for the players to work out and progress their way through the content to actually reach the next step. This will be like Classic releasing with Molten Core and Blackwing Lair open at the same time. It doesn't take long to realise that Molten Core loot is by and large going to be pretty useless after a short space of time, and we will see this happen just again if Tier 4 and Tier 5 are available at the same time, because the speed at which players blast through content nowadays is just unreal. I definitely think the game would benefit from having these two phases segregated out, so that we can enjoy and fully see one through before the next thing comes out. And it would also give us more to look forwards to in the future in terms of new gear and itemization. Also, if you're big on PvP, I would think you'd want the content phases to be separated out a bit more, because in the Burning Crusade there are 3 tiers, but there are 4 PvP seasons, and the PvE content that's made available sort of overtakes PvP gear, and then PvP stuff catches back up again. So for example, early on if we release with Tier 5, people are going to have access to Serpent Shrine Cavern loot, to Tempest Keep loot, to Stun Herald, while you're sitting there in your PvP Season 1 gear still. And it wasn't, back in the day at least, until after Black Temple had released, until PvP Arena Season 2 came out. And even then you're not really catching up with Tier 5 gear. Then again, resilience is much of its own thing, but it does open up different avenues where people performing at high level PvE content will have the edge on certain items like trinkets or weapons. And with the idea that the content could be split up more is the potential that we will once again see the best version of our class alongside the easiest version of the content. This is what happened in Classic. We had our 1.12 itemization, our talents, our abilities, and our classes were just so much more powerful than they would have been back at launch. Now, to a certain degree, there was a lot more learning, shall we say, going through vanilla. Our classes on day 1 looked absolutely nothing like they did by the final one, with many tweaks made to try and fit classes into their niche, make them a bit more powerful, or just give them a bit of a leg up in general. By TBC, there is a lot more balance across the classes, and each class brings something unique and is valuable in one way or another. Not everyone's going to be topping the meters, but at least now as a raid leader, you have a reason to want every single class and spec in your raid, which is a really good thing. But if we do go into TBC with 2.4.3 classes, as well as the earlier raids nerfed, I think it's just going to be Molten Core all over again, where it's so much easier than anybody expected, but now with Tier 4 instead. When Blackwing Lair came out, there was how many challenges in there really? Firemore, and then AQ, you have Twin Emperors perhaps, Oro, Viscidus as the challenges, and then finally in Naxxramas we're starting to see some actual time period appropriate class balance, itemization balance, talent balance, and wow, look, people are actually starting to wipe now because of that. I'm just hoping TBC doesn't end up being another very trivial PvE content route up to the Sunwell where it suddenly becomes hard. And there are a number of ways to do that, because just like Classic, our itemization, our characters got stronger and stronger as the expansion went on, whilst the raids got nerfed. So I hope there is some kind of balance struck there. Finally, AoE caps. So in patch 2.2, Blizzard finally put a stop to the ridiculousness of certain classes, looking at mages, and what they're able to achieve using AoE. So at this point in Classic, it's extremely well documented. There's dozens and dozens of videos out there on YouTube on Zul'Farrak, on doing Maradon, pulling over 350 mobs, doing ZG, you name it. People have absolutely cracked the code, and I can't help but thinking, but if players ever got to this level of proficiency back in vanilla, this would have been nerfed really fast, because this is just beyond what any other class can achieve. So in Burning Crusade, when the changes finally hit, it definitely shifted up the power paradigm that classes had within the content. Not every single AoE ability is strictly cap though. Basically, if your ability targets the ground and has an aiming reticle like Blizzard, Hurricane, Volley, Rain of Fire, anything like that, they are AoE capped, where the simple way to explain how it works is your AoE ability can do a maximum threshold of damage per the number of targets that it hits. If the numbers of targets you're hitting exceed that threshold, your damage is reduced accordingly. So for example, say a Mage's Blizzard is capped at 1000 damage per 10 mobs, and it will be doing 100 damage to each mob. If you were then hitting 20 mobs, it'd be doing 50 to each, and so on and so forth. So it really does hinder the power of AoE. But once again, this is another thing about progressive versus not progressive. It took up to patch 2.2 for something to be done about this. So if that isn't the case, we're going to see the continuation of mage boosting, of mage gold farming, and no doubt finding new ways to exploit terrain inside the new instances, which may not have ever been discovered by the private server scene, just because we have so many more players thrown at a common issue now. And whilst mages do get nerfed, paladins really take over the reins, but I don't think we're going to see a paladin pulling 300 or something mobs in at least TBC era content. In vanilla content, we'll have to wait and see, or at least once paladins start hitting some really late game TBC gear. In any event, BlizzCon will be coming soon, and I'm hoping for a lot more information there. A big announcement on the main stage, and then hopefully a panel some point down the line where they're going to explain some of their thought processes. If anything, I just want to hear them say, this is what we did for Classic, we think this worked, we think this didn't work, and we're going to change the game around the player base rather than trying to force the players to try and play like they did back in the day, because that just hasn't really worked for Classic. Anyways, let me know what you think. These were just a few ideas off the top of my head today. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one very soon. If you like what you see, do give the video a like and subscribe, as there will be plenty more to come. Thank you guys all so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.